our guest. Listen, guys, if you have not seen this movie yet, this documentary, I want you to go out and see it. I challenge you to go see it. Salem, produced by the Salem Media Group. But Catherine Englebrecht of True the Vote is with us to discuss 2,000 Mules. Catherine, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Again, I don't know what's happening here. You get the ovation. I never do when I'm sitting in this seat. So they absolutely love you, Catherine. So I appreciate you being on. Listen, you started True the Vote at first. I actually want to talk about that before we get into 2,000 Mules. What led you to start truethevote.org? What was it? How did you get started? What motivated you to get started on that?
It was very simple. We heard that there were not enough volunteers to work at the polls in an off-term election, and it was happening at a time that we were it was when the Tea Party was coming up. People were sort of questioning, how do we fit into government? And so we thought, well, let's just go work at the polls. That's something we can do and feel good about it. And when we came back and compared notes, some of us had wonderful experiences, but others had said, there's just some weird things that were happening, and let's kind of drill into those. And a lot of that centered around bad process and bad data in poll books. And so we started doing research and sort of reverse engineering, and one thing led to the next. And it was a continued observation around two things, really. Number one, the power of citizen engagement. But the second is the importance of good process. And so over the years, we've continued on, but we've seen this continued erosion of process. Never before like what we saw in 2020. And that's what brings us here today. So it's been a long journey that I could have never imagined, but it couldn't be more important than it is right now.
Now let me just go back to that real quickly, because you talked about the erosion of process. I love the way you framed that. So when you said you were witnessing an erosion of process, you're talking about at a local level or at a state level,
Absolutely.
Precinct level. What was it that you were seeing where it's just like, okay, the process is just screwed up here. We should be doing A, B, and C. They're doing D, E, and F. Or what was it? What does that look like?
Right. Well, I mean, so initially, the very, very first blush of all of this was working at the polls and seeing people who would come in and I mean, there were a number of things, but the most prevalent was people who would come in and say, I don't remember who I'm supposed to vote for. And
Whoa.
then the election worker would take them and not help them with the machine, because that's something different. That's okay. But really tell them, this is how you should vote, or just vote straight ticket. It's much easier. I mean, really giving them more than guidance.
Sure.
And it made you question, look, if this is what happens when people are actually watching, what happens when no one's watching? And other issues like people coming in, and in Texas at the time, we didn't have photo voter identification. And so you had just paper registration cards. People would come in with more than one card, things that happen. And when they happen, it happens in the blink of an eye. And then you go, well, wait, I don't think that's right. How could that be? And it really begs the question, how could it be? And I think that, over time, we've seen the continued sort of how could it be moments, not just in Texas, but all across the country. And then in 2020, I mean, again, it was a confluence of bad process that really, could have only ended in disaster, as we now know it did.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get to that, because one of the things we briefly spoke about offline concerning 2,000 Mules, or concerning the election of 2020. And again, I'm speaking to Catherine Englebrecht of truethevote.org, truethevote.org. Honestly, I'm so fascinated with this, Catherine, simply because you were a citizen that got involved, and now look at what God is doing with you. This is fascinating to me. But obviously, you worked with Dinesh D'Souza. You guys created this documentary, 2,000 Mules. And we were talking about after the election of 2020, I knew, we all knew, in my opinion, that something had gone terribly wrong. I was with my colleagues here in the studio in Orlando, Florida, the American Adversaries. We were all just all right, Trump has got this. It's over. We stayed here. I think it was nearly 2 a.m. I drive home, 30-minute drive home. I get home. I could barely sleep, but I go to sleep for a couple of hours. I wake up 2, maybe 3 hours later. I start looking at the numbers, and all of the states that Biden needed to win, he started gaining ground. He underperformed in all the other states, but the only remaining states he had began to overperform, ironically, all 6 of them overnight. And I mean, it's just common sense, like something isn't right. At the time, we didn't have any evidence, but it's just something is not right. But my frustration was I felt the Trump administration and the law team went a little too broad because I just knew there wasn't enough time. Your response?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, True the Vote's been sort of alone on the battlefield for a number of years. We were the only pro-liberty election integrity group. And so when we saw so many new faces, it was troubling because one thing that I've learned over the years is the election process, again, going back to that term, is far more convoluted than you might first guess. And things that I thought were fraud maybe in 2010, now I recognize as just broken process. It doesn't make it okay, but the fraud has been, the fraud's been institutionalized in a way that we've allowed. And so you take those arguments, some of the arguments that were being made in court, it's, you just start peeling back the layers of, well, no, this is actually, I wouldn't say legal necessarily based on some of the arguments, but it was just, there was no hook. There was no hook to hang on. And we felt like, the only way to really get to the bottom of this is figure out where there might be opportunities to create patterning or tracking in some way that would result in evidence. And so that's the path that we took. But it was very hard to watch so many well-intended people just, the thing about elections is you have so little time after an election to get your story together. And if you're not ready, if you're just caught flat-footed, I mean, here's a little data point that I find particularly fascinating. As of March 1, 2021, so clearly all states are done. I mean, we're way past, the all that went into the top of the ticket battles. March 1, only 11 states had published their 2020 census. In other words, only 11 states could tell you who voted in the 2020 election as of March 1. So how then? Right. So how can you certify an election if you cannot, with clarity, say these are the votes that came in and these votes were cast and counted? So I mean, there was just so much, and we did it to ourselves in 2020. We saw the freight train coming down the field or down the track, and I think the average American just thought, well, I mean, a lot of stuff that was happening didn't make sense, but surely it's not what it seems. Surely this whole election and the way they were pushing mail ballots and dropping in these privately funded drop boxes, surely somebody's got our back here. They're watching it. They're protecting us. And what we now know is no, it wasn't happening.